Political dynasties have long been a feature of the Philippine political landscape. For decades, we have seen the spectacle of candidates filing their candidacy for elective posts in the elections. Serious candidates who somehow have familiar faces and surnames. That familiarity starts to get clear as we realize that the same people keep on coming back time and time again for re-election, even including people who have been indicted for misuse of money. I ask you, do you really think the recycling of family members into elective posts would truly benefit the progression of our nation? Some people may say that there is nothing wrong with political dynasty, but I believe that this must be put to an end, or must be greatly limited by law for the guaranteed growth of our country. The extent of political dynasties in the Philippines is off the chart compared to any other country in the world. A study by the Ateneo School of Government showed that political dynasties now possess 29% of all local elected posts, growing by about 1% or 170 positions per election period since 1988. This increase in the number of political dynasties is a major problem because of how it tends to undermine democracy and strong democratic institutions. The literature on political dynasties shows that political dynasties are bad for governance. In some ways, they lead to less educated leaders who are selected through unfair competition. It can also result in clientelism or poor spending. Political dynasties have cleverly exploited over time the poverty of our people and their lack of informed judgment. The lack of political competition and the prevalence of political dynasties prevents the majority of the citizenry from communicating their needs to the government, thus preventing it from appropriately and adequately responding to socio-economic problems. We urgently need to change. We need to get rid of the dynasties in our political system, or at least limit them to a minimum, where they can no longer limit voters' options, hinder cities and provinces from reaching their full potential, and block path to progress. One could argue that through political dynasty, past programs and projects initially worked on by the previous politician could now be resumed and even expanded on by the successor. One stand made by Banker Olson, a popular American economist and political scientist, sees political clans as not necessarily detrimental to development. Also built up the notion of roving bandits versus stationary bandits. The idea is that leaders with a relatively longer tenure in office will have the incentive to develop their respective jurisdictions as they foresee the future benefits it will reap for them. And yet, why do thousands of Filipinos continue to live in poverty? To answer briefly, political dynasties breed corruption. Studies show that many parts of the country where political dynasties thrive are less developed and have stayed poor. According to an analysis by Director Ronald Mendoza of the Policy Center at the Asian Institute of Management, those jurisdictions in the 15th Congress where fat dynasties reigned and directly correlated with lower standards of living, lower human development, and higher levels of deprivation. In short, the fatter the dynasty, the higher the poverty incidence. If the members of these dynasties are the saviors of the people, what exactly have they accomplished to improve the general welfare, especially that of the poor? From my perspective, none. The impact of political dynasties on development remains rather ambiguous now in the Philippines. I would advocate for them to be eliminated in favor of a strictly merit-based selection process. Experts must lead our government, not self-righteous thieves who are merely motivated by self-interest. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately the Filipino people who will decide if they will deem certain families as simply political dynasties or family with a legacy of public service. We must not only be reliant on the government in the abolishing political dynasty, but we must take it into ourselves to support and to vote for honest and competent candidates. Because in the end, what's in a name?